Go ahead. Forward. All right. Afternoon, everybody. Here I have Dr. Travis Goodson. He is my commanding officer in the Georgia National Guard. Along with, he's become one of my both personal and professional mentors. Um, Sir, if you don't mind, just a little introduction about yourself, what your degree is in, and kind of what you do.
All right, perfect. Well, thanks for having me on, Wesley. I appreciate it. I'm Dr. Travis Goodson. Please call me Travis. What I do is I'm the CEO of my own defense innovation company. We're called Innovi Defense. And I have a lot of other professional and personal pursuits. I'm a professor of psychology at Albany State University. It's an HBCU in Albany, Georgia. And I'm also involved very heavily with the Pentagon and the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the development and assessments of technology across the Department of Defense. So my degrees are all very tree-like. They go from the bottom to the top in the same discipline. I have a bachelor's degree in general psychology, where I fell in love with it. I have a master's degree in industrial and organizational psychology, and then I have a doctorate degree in philosophy with a specialization in industrial and organizational psychology. So hopefully that helps.
It does. I appreciate it. And it's definitely one. And when I first started looking at getting into college and whatnot, it's one of the main reasons that I came to you. We had that very long sit down in your office discussing what I wanted to pursue and whatnot. And I think you just, with what you just said, it proves in doubt that with psychology, you can go a bunch of different ways whilst helping in a bunch of different areas. Um, so what initially made you want to pursue psychology and then pursue the areas that you have from starting on, working for people to working for yourself? What made you want to start that route?
Whew, how much time do you have? So let's start from the beginning, and I will do my best to synthesize the timeline. So, I went to college for pre-medicine. I had a really good friend at the time. His name is Matt Whitman, and Matt and I both signed up for pre-med, and we knew we needed to go through and get an undergraduate in something that we would like, but that also helped us with our professional pursuits. So we both chose general psychology as a mechanism to check that block. And realistically, when I started studying psychology, particularly social psychology, I just fell in love, and I knew that that's what I where I was called to be. I still thought that I was going to be, some type of medical doctor, a physician, implementing those skills. But realistically, I just kept progressing through my degree, and my buddy Matt, he went on to go to med school, and he was 2 years ahead of me, and was like, "Hey, this is not what we wanted," and it made me kind of reevaluate some of my life choices. I trusted him, and then I had my mindset that I wanted to be a clinical neuropsychologist. And I started that track. I graduated with my bachelor's degree and started a degree in counseling. It's kind of a natural shoe in with a lot of the prerequisites. I got about three-quarters of the way through that. And I just found that I wasn't as clinically oriented as perhaps what was needed. I did really well in the program, but it just wasn't a good fit. And just having that agility to say, this isn't for me, this is not what I want to do with my life, I was able to pivot and explore other options. So, one of the things that I did is I relied on my mentors to assist me with matching with the right degree program. And what I found is that I'm naturally inquisitive. I'm fairly introverted, and I like to be able to demonstrate with valid statistics certain positions. So I found industrial and organizational psychology, and a lot was happening professionally for me. I was an alpha team leader for a SWAT team as a police officer, and there was just so much going on in my life. And God called me to Afghanistan. And while I was there, I was able to knock out my master's degree. So I had a master's of arts in industrial and organizational psychology. And then towards the end of it, I always wanted to be a doctor. I always wanted to be a doctor. I don't know why. I can't explain it. Maybe it was a personal, goal that I had. But when I was nearing the end of my master's degree, I had a couple professors that I had befriended that had gotten really close to me. Could have been the trauma from Afghanistan, but they had a soft spot in their heart. So one particular psychologist that was one of my faculty mentors, his name was Dr. Matthew Swain, the smartest mathematician I've ever met in my entire life. He now serves as the lead statistician for the American Board of Internal Medicine for the entire United States of America. And I distinctly remember having a conversation before I was getting ready to leave Afghanistan on the deployment. And he said, "You need to get a doctorate degree." And at that time, I was like 26, 25, somewhere in there. And I said, "Sir, this isn't for me. Like, that's for really smart people." And he was like, you're one of them. You need to keep going. He's like, I'm gonna fill out your packet. You just need to write a letter that I will send in. It's a brand new program, but you need to get a PhD in industrial and organizational psychology. He said, this is you. You have a gift, and you want to help people, you want to serve people, but you have a very unique way of doing that and a very unique brain. He said, so this is a very rare field. It's not very common. It's like the 14th division of the American Psychological Association. And, with God's providence and a lot of hard work and a lot of crying, I was able to get through a doctorate degree with a 4.0. So hopefully that kind of wraps that conversation up. If you have any questions, I'd love to answer them.
It does. And so another thing that I've struggled with, and and we've had the personal conversations about it. What were some of the challenges you faced? And I know you mentioned, God helped you get through things, religion helps you get through. What were some ways that that helped you transition from the law enforcement world, the military world? Being with the guard, it's that two-faced, or not two-faced, but that dual-faced profession and whatnot. Were there any challenges? If there were, how did you, work through some of those challenges coming from the law enforcement field, which you know better than I do. It's a very unique field that's very difficult to find the same type of, I guess, belonging and sense of helping folks and whatnot. Were there any challenges when you transitioned from law enforcement to psychology?
So I would say yes, but probably not in the way that you think. I would say that having a background in law enforcement, that social psychology aspect of it is integrating with people in groups, out groups, social norms, mores, laws, legalities, and things of that nature. It provides a very natural segue into some of the more heavier psychological sciences. And by heavier, I mean things that are very complex and encumbered and entangled. They get messy. When you're looking at scale development, psychometrics is the actual subdiscipline. But if you're looking at some of those things, having a practical, real world based experience dramatically helps you to explain that to other people. And that's kind of one of the gifts I think law enforcement gives you, is the ability to take a topic that might be up here. Just a top level example, right? So you take aggravated assault or aggravated battery, and when you're trying to break down that very lengthy code section and explain it to somebody, a mother, or perhaps an older child, and while you're taking one of their parents, of their freedoms, taking that away is because of an action, you're able to break those things down that are very complex and very challenging, but in the moment under a lot of pressure. So the gift that law enforcement gave me through trauma was to be able to take those complex and break them down in a way that not only other people could understand, but put them in examples that I could understand personally to really help accelerate my learning. Now, the challenges that came along with that, I would say it's a two-sided coin, is that along with that experience that I had and that I was getting while I was completing my degrees, also presented some very unique pain points. Law enforcement hours, unique to that profession, is incredibly stressful. It's incredibly stressful, and there's not much that you can do to circumvent that. Just the very nature of the work itself is in of itself stressful. Whether you're dealing with the death of a child or a murder or some type of sexually oriented crime or something that's very complex with the drug cartel, this very high level complex topics. And people can say, oh, but it's law and it's in black and white. But the problem is where the rubber meets the road and you're dealing with people. It's not the law that's the problem. It's how do you connect the dots, and then also have some type of quality of life with a family on top of it. So the challenges that I faced in black and white were time. I was dedicating a lot of my time and mental energy towards solving some very difficult crimes and also struggling to cope with my own depression and anxiety associated with that field, while also getting the benefit of those experiences helping me with my degree. So the same is true with the Army. There was many times in Afghanistan where I was in the middle of a report or taking a final exam and we were being rocketed, we were being attacked, and I would have to go through and run outside, put on my kit, and have some command and control over the echelons that were responding to those terrorist acts of violence. It's very unique. I would say that less than probably 1% of the 1% get to experience those challenges as a part of their master's and doctoral journeys. But it did uniquely position me for the work that I'm attending to today and wrestling with those complex topics, the emotional challenges that are associated, and being able to think level headed while dealing with a lot of those struggles that you'll encounter for your master's degree and doctorate degree. I would say that I had to accept the coin, but when I accepted that coin, I accepted both sides, both the challenges as well as the benefits associated. Hopefully that clarifies your question.
It does. I appreciate it. and with that, with the challenges and whatnot, and obviously, starting college relatively late at 30, is there anything differently you would have done starting out? Any advice for me starting at a little bit of a later age and whatnot? Any recommendations, things you would have done differently that, would have helped, I guess, maybe streamline or made things not necessarily easier, because the easier way isn't always the most beneficial or the proper way to do things, but a way to, I guess, for lack of better terms, make things a little bit easier for you in the process.
Absolutely. With age comes experience. I don't believe that education, formal education is only for those that are, 20 to 30 years old. I'm a huge proponent of education at any level, at any skill level, at any generational cohort. I believe that education is unanimous and ubiquitous. It can apply to all people that desire an additional source of knowledge. So I don't think that there's a right age to go to college. But I do think that there are different nuances associated with different generational cohorts. So addressing yours specifically, that 28 to 38 age range, I would say that you have a leg up. And the reason why you have a leg up is because you have experience and you know how you think. One of the harder things about going to college whenever you're psychologically and neurobiologically immature is that you're wrestling with concepts that might be out of your depth for the life experiences that you've obtained. And that was something that was not just unique to an age, but I would just say experiential maturity. Whereas I grew up, traveling the world, and I had been to war, and I had seen life and death. A lot of my peers struggled with some of these concepts. So you're in a very unique position to apply the things that you had through your experiences to solidifying your education, because the whole goal isn't just to go to class and to pass a test. It's knowledge transference. It's the construct of getting the information from those teaching you and being able to program that in your heart, mind, body, soul, so you can impart that knowledge later on to somebody else to make an impact. So because you know how to do that and have repetitions of what your learning style is, what your personality is, how you best structure your day, you'll be able to adjust much better to some of these cognitive loads than other people that don't have those frames of reference. Some of the things that I would do differently now, but now I'm, 32-year-old Travis, I'm not 21, 22, 23-year-old Travis, is I would pay more attention to where my energy is directed. So, for example, I was not unlike many, if not all 20-year-olds, is I wanted to live life to the fullest. And while that's a good thing, is that your time is the most valuable resource that you have. But the secondary to time is because time influences your level of energy and effort. And what you'll find, particularly as you engage in a master's degree or a doctoral degree, is that the cognitive loads get absolutely astronomical. And the weighing of topics and the of research is incredibly taxing. There's times that I would wrestle with two articles for 4 days and just read and read and read and attempt to understand what the connections and pain points were. And later on, in my later 20s, early 30s, I graduated from my doctorate degree when I was 20, 29. But 27 to 28, I would literally go downstairs and tell my wife, I need 6 hours alone. I would not have done that as a 21-year-old. I would have tried to make everything happen at the same time. But as I got older, that experience taught me is I needed time to sit with the material. Nobody was teaching me. I was just wrestling silently with what I was attempting to learn. So management of your time and energy is probably the most critical thing for your age bracket. Um, and then potentially every age bracket. But I just know as a 20-year-old, I would tell myself, that that's not important and I was going to figure it out anyway. But now as a 30-year-old, I'd probably take a lot more heedance, to that advice and abide by it. So I finish strong and successfully.
Okay. Um, so with that, with the time management, and I feel like that's something where just starting college, I've already not struggled with, because like you said, with the experiences that I've had, both as a police officer, as a squad leader, things like that, I've learned how to balance it. But I can definitely understand, and that's one of the challenges that I'm looking at, that I've kind of self-addressed, is definitely finding that time management with baseball practice for my son, and between drill and shift and whatnot. It's definitely one of those. So it's definitely it's I it's good to hear that I'm not the only one that struggled, that had has that issue with that. So only a couple more questions and I'll let you go. Again, I really appreciate your time. Um, are there any negative trends that you're seeing in and I say the psychology field, but it is very broad as we've kind of already discussed. Are there any negative trends that you've seen that you're beginning to see? Or on the flip side, any positive trends that have come to light? And if so, how can those change? Somebody that's coming in as a new into the field, something that I could do that, to better the field, or not make it worse in terms.
That's a great question. That's a very loaded question. It's very complex and it's very heavy. And the reason why is because the different divisions of the American Psychological Association are very unique. They're very nuanced. They have a lot of substrata, if you will, as to what composes those fields. But some things that might apply to me in industrial and organizational psychology specifically, and then I'll provide some generalizations. But we've been heavily impacted by artificial intelligence. And in the field of IO psychology, a lot of people don't know how to articulate exactly what we do. And it's not nebulous. It's spread all over the place. IO psychology is a very unique and a discipline that has a lot of depth. So there's not a lot of width, okay? And there's disciplines that have width and depth. You look at something like clinical psychology. So clinical psychology, they have this neurodiagnostic criteria. They have, the ABCs, affect, behavior, cognition. They function by some of those social psychological constructs. They have a baseline familiarity with psychometric scales, not with the development, but the reading and interpretability. They have some psychopharmacology experience. They also have like adolescence through gerontology, which is like the study of the elderly. So they're very wide. But unlike that, industrial and organizational psychology is really the profession of statistics. And that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable. And this is my personal opinion, mine and mine only. A very unique vantage point because I am an industrial and organizational psychologist actively doing the IO thing. And why I say the IO thing is because there's a lot of people that have an IO degree, but instead of doing IO pure work, they do everything that's human resources related. So what I'm seeing in my particular field is a lot of people, they don't have either the necessary competencies or they're not confident in their ability to do the tasks demanded of them of their chosen profession, and they default to another career field. So when we look at human resources, we have credentialing programs like SHRM, which is Senior Human Resource Management. We have, MBAs that do a lot of that type of work. But there's very specific nuanced work associated with being an IO psychologist that gives us our profession. And the more I look at it, the more and more divergence I see from the field because it's hard. It's really hard. A part of our discipline, you basically have two main pillars. You have qualitative and quantitative statistics. And a lot of people, even at the master's and PhD level, what we're finding is a departure from quantitative analysis, right? So they're not familiar with scale development. They're not robust in their mathematical reasoning. They're not very analytical, and they're going into a very qualitative type of mindset. So qualitative is like interviews, and there's nothing wrong with interviews. But what uniquely defines industrial and organizational psychology is we look at a business problem, we collect data, both quantitative and qualitative, and then we make recommendations. That's what we do. So if you limit yourself to only qualitative data without the robust statistical validity that you need, then you really rob yourself of a lot of the value that you bring to the table. So in industrial and organizational psychology, the getting away from the applied mathematics and the very heavy statistical MANOVA, MANCOVA, heteroscedasticity, homogeneity of variance, chi-square goodness of fit tests, SEM, which is structural equation modeling. We look at confirmatory factor analysis, the emphasis that we place on psychometrics and scale development, and then job development, job task development. A lot of these things in the field, people are saying, that's really hard. I don't want to do that. So they take this degree that is ultimately extremely complex and has a lot of value, and they water it down, and then they complain that they can't find jobs. And the reason why they can't find jobs in that career field is because they don't want to do what they signed up to do. They want to do human resources functions. They want to do talent management. They want to do recruiting. And that's a subset of industrial and organizational psychology, but it's not the meat and the potatoes. It's not why we do what we do. You have this much impact in talent management specifically, this much impact in human resources. But IO psychology is all of it. It's literally how do we appropriately source the right talent? How do we measure the effectiveness of our onboarding programs? How do we conduct pay scale studies to ensure that we're compensating effectively? Where does that strategy fit into the overall schema of our organization strategy to go and achieve specific visions and mission statements and benchmarks? And how do we do acquisitions and mergers effectively? How do we wrap all this together to make the organization function effectively? So if you just take one puzzle piece and say, this is your whole job, then you've really just thrown the rest of it away. And we're seeing that a lot in 2025 as people diverge from the sound statistical rigor that they've been taught to do. So that's IO psychology. I'm very passionate about that. And again, artificial intelligence is a whole other factor. But what we're seeing is because people don't want to do math and applied mathematics and do that skilled reasoning, they're turning that over to ChatGPT and the OpenAI deep research models. But the problem with that is if you don't know the right questions to ask, you don't know the right prompts, and you don't know how to validate the output, then we're just guessing. That happens all the time. It happens in the private sector, the public sector. It even happens in academia, where we have these professionals that are supposed to do what they're, trained formally to do. So that's IO psychology. From the broader psychological landscape, I would say is that we've diluted psychology so much. We've given up a lot of ground in terms of who we are as professionals, and we're just kind of blending the different fields. And I understand, intra-organizational and interdiscipline coordination. I get that, but a social psychologist is not an IO psychologist. An IO psychologist is not a clinical psychologist. A clinical psychologist is not an abnormal psychologist. It would be like saying that a pastry chef is also an expert in culinary arts for meat preparation. Yes, they both fall under the food service industry at a very executive level, but they're very unique disciplines. Like baking cookies is not the same as, grilling a prime rib. There's different skills that are associated. The whole science is different. Baking is more art than it is science. It really is. And I'm not an expert baker or, an expert meat preparer, if you will, but I use that example to put it in common terms of what we're looking at in the stratification and the division of the American Psychological Association. That was a lot. If you have any questions, I would love to answer it, but it's obviously something that I'm very passionate about and something that I'm very invested in.
So is it something where, as I continue education and pass bachelor's into master's and doctorate, because per our conversations in the past, it's definitely something where I don't want to stop at a bachelor's and I want to continue on. Is it a field where it's possible to study multiple areas, for example, industrial and operational or clinical? Because one of my goals is, once again, we've had this conversation of finding someone that understands the trauma that we as law enforcement, we in the military have gone through and seen. It's very hard to find people that can understand, because as much as someone does say I understand, until you've dealt with a dead child, it's something you don't understand. So would there be a way where exploring the clinical side to be able to help become a PTSD counselor while also pursuing, say, industrial and operational, or criminal psychology? Is it a field where it's possible to specialize in multiple subsects?
So the short answer is yes and no. Yes. Is it possible for you to get multiple masters and multiple PhDs? It's entirely possible. But it's not plausible. And the reason why, from this perspective, from the opposite side of the fence, is the amount of complexity that you will face, the amount of understanding that needs to happen, the amount of digesting volumes of material to become the epitome in that one specific subdiscipline is just astronomical. I think that most PhD students, if they get to the end and they graduate, would agree with me is that that's one of the most grueling experiences of their life. And there's a certain sense of fulfillment that comes with graduating with that discipline. So I would be very hard pressed. And I would like to think that I'm very ambitious, but I'd be very hard pressed to go back through and get a second, third, fourth, or fifth doctorate degree, more or less when I can be just as effective with one. Now, here's the bridge though. I'm not going to go through and say it's negative. but I will explain a little bit about my unique skill set and how industrial organizational psychology does bleed into a subdiscipline. So when I was looking at my dissertation topic, and by the way, everything that you do throughout your entire college experience, whether you realize it or not, prepares you for the 2 to 3 years that you will spend as a research scientist doing what is known as your dissertation. That is your first originally published research project from beginning to end. There's a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth. There's a lot of imposter syndrome and thinking that you're not cut out for this. You will wrestle with who you are at your core element when you're going through your dissertation. But the person that you are on the end of that is a much more complete version of yourself. But that being said, when I was looking at topics that I wanted to do for my dissertation specifically, I wanted to study leadership, but not this nebulous, touchy-feely, like, okay, so you know about leadership. We talk about servant leadership all the time in the DoD and then also in the private sector. But what does it actually mean? I wanted to do something that was mentally challenging for me that added value. Well, at the same time that I was orchestrating my dissertation process, what was going on at the same time? The global pandemic known as COVID-19. So I don't have a master's degree in public health. I don't. But public health and a little bit of virology, right? So you look at SARS-CoV-2 variants. You look at, the gastrointestinal issues that are associated with symptomatic expressions. You looked at viral loadings. We had a little bit of chemistry, a little bit of biology. All of these things are wrapped up in my research. So I was relying on my understanding of scale development, right? So I chose to redesign Mary Ulbane and Grain's, what was it? Their 1995 leader member exchange 7-item scale. So it was the LMX7. And I chose to use that leadership scale as a way to measure public's perception of trust in their appointed or elected officials. So what I was doing is saying, okay, if I want to measure leadership and I want to show a true operational value added impact, then what I need to do is I need a way to study how people perceive their elected officials and their willingness to abide by the public health mandates that were set by those offices. Two completely different disciplines, but I use psychology to understand the human behavior associated with both of those disciplines. The discipline here would be like public health, obviously, from like the virology standpoint, the symptomatic expression and control, maybe a little bit of public policy, as well as executive leadership and public administration. So two topics that were studied in my dissertation, and it was linked by industrial and organizational psychology. So it was my background in quantitative and qualitative mathematics and data science that allowed me to look at those nuanced vectors, if you will, between the two topics and to study the bridge between both subdisciplines. So in essence, for yourself, when you look at, we'll look at trauma responses amongst vets and those first responders, and we'll look at, potentially hireability. So we'll look at how does someone's PTSD rating impact their hiring in the public sector or the private sector. There are scales out there, the DASS-21, the depression, anxiety, and stress subscale with 21 items. You could use that to evaluate clinically, more or less, on a valid psychometric scale, what their level or severity of symptomatic expression is, and then study them longitudinally over 6 to 12 months if they're in an unemployed status or with a cohort or whatever, to look at what that looks like. And then you could publish something on it and say, hey, I evaluated from an industrial and organizational psychology perspective with this scale, with these variables and outcomes in a quantitative measurement. I'm going to throw out some numbers here that could be potentially this, is that, at a probability level of 0.01, which is statistically significant, we had a statistically significant relationship between the variables of severity of PTSD and hireability. So hireability could be some defined metric or some scale that you either develop or find in the literature, and you could study those things and you could publish on that. So it's very plausible that inside of a discipline that you can expand research on that topic. But to circle back, going after a PhD in criminology, a PhD in IO psychology, a PhD in clinical counseling or mental health, that's just not feasible. You don't have enough years on the planet to get good enough to make an impact. You're looking at potentially 6 years apiece. So do you want to dedicate 13, 14, 15, 16 years to education, so when you're 50 you can start? Or do you want to get a PhD in something that applies and touches all those fields and then start adding value in the next 5 to 6 years? So that was a very long answer, but I wanted to be specific so you had something to go off of with examples, with timelines, what it looks like, and then also the positives and negatives associated with your question.
So it definitely sounds, and it's one thing that interested me in the psychology field, and that honestly it strengthened it more. It sounds very much, to put it into layman's terms and to kind of break it down, of it's you're a jack of all trades with a master of one, where you are a master of one specific area, but branching and jack of all trades into other fields of psychology.
Yes, I would say that the main reason you go to get a PhD, and I say this beyond the fact, once that's done, you don't get a PhD to become an expert. So for anybody and everybody watching this, you don't go to get a PhD to become an expert. You do it to learn how to get the answers that you need. It's really and truthfully an understanding of the scientific method and its application and how you can use science to derive at a well-tested conclusion. And all those things are absolutely beautiful. So my mentor, my friend, Dr. Matthew Swain, one of the things that he said that made a lot of impact to me was when you graduate with a PhD, it's like getting a driver's license. So when you just get your learner's permit or your driver's license, are you an expert at driving?
Absolutely not.
No. And it's a weird analogy, but when you graduate with your PhD, it's like someone handing you your license for the first time. You're not expected to be an expert. And the rest of the world doesn't know this, and it's great because they think we're awesome. But really and truthfully, we just have the training to know how to operate the vehicle. We know how to do research. We know how to make great questions and testable hypotheses. We know about the literature that backs up what we're trying to research. But really, it just gives us a license to do research. That's it. And then we figure it out from there. So really, your journey in true deep theoretical learning starts when you graduate with a doctorate degree, because then you finally had the license and all the training needed to actually start driving. It doesn't happen at the bachelor's degree level and you're expected to be an expert at a PhD. That's not how this works. You go through all of this training and then you start when you graduate. It's crazy when you think about it that way, but great question.
It is. And, I feel like that, honestly, I like that analogy, and it really relates to just about everything, from, my experiences as both, an infantryman in the Marine Corps and now in the Guard. You learn the textbook and school way to do it, and then you get out into the operational force, and then you actually learn how to be a good leader, and you learn how to be an infantry leader. And from the law enforcement side too, the mandate will teach you how to do it by the book, and then you get out and you learn how to become a true law enforcement officer, and how to then you become a master, and you become a master of that craft and whatnot.
Completely agree. Completely agree.
So, well, sir, I won't take any more of your time. I really, really appreciate you taking your time to do this for me, and very much look forward to future conversations with you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Godspeed. God bless, and best of luck in your education, my friend. We'll talk later.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Have a good one.